The unsealed affidavit that set the stage for the FBI raid at the Fulton County Elections Office. Georgia's Republican Secretary of State is now blasting the reasoning behind that raid, saying it included baseless and repackaged claims. In other words, this is the real witch hunt, folks. This is it. You're watching it unfold. But the big bombshell from today's unsealed affidavit is this, quote, the FBI criminal investigation originated from a referral sent by Kurt Olson. Now, who's Kurt Olson? Well, Kurt Olson served as Trump's campaign lawyer in 2020, embracing election lies in an attempt to overturn the results. Olson spoke with Trump 3 times on January 6th, according to the Select Committee's investigation. Also breaking tonight, MS Now confirms President Trump ordered the CIA to share intelligence with Olson. And if you look at the biggest news of the day, you begin to understand why Donald Trump is so desperate to rig the 2026 midterms. Folks, he doesn't want the Democrats to win the majority and investigate his own administration. Look at how they grilled Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick today about his connections to Jeffrey Epstein. Now imagine what that would sound like if they had subpoena power.
Did you, in fact, make the visit to Jeffrey Epstein's private island?
I did have lunch with him as I was on a boat going across on a family vacation. We had lunch on the island. That is true, for an hour, and we left with all of my children, with my nannies and my wife, all together. We were on family vacation. We were not apart. To suggest there was anything untoward about that in 2012, I don't recall why we did it.
Okay. I'm sorry. Joining us now, Mark Elias, founder of Democracy Docket and chair of Elias Law Group.
I'm still reeling, Mark, from my nannies, plural, but we'll get to that all in a second. Let's talk about what we are learning out of Fulton County. Do you have a better understanding of why a magistrate judge signed off on that FBI raid from the unsealed affidavit?
No, and I'm really upset about it because the fact is we trust the courts to stand up against the election deniers, the politicization of the Department of Justice, and the violation of civil rights. And in this instance, in my view, based on this affidavit, the magistrate judge just failed to do that. I mean, what this affidavit that supports the search warrant contains is frankly just repackaged lies from 2020. It originated, as you pointed out, from a referral from Kurt Olson, who was not only an election denier in 2020. My law firm actually went up against him in 2022 when he represented Kerry Lake in trying to overturn a free and fair election for governor in that state. And the idea that, he packaged up, or, the FBI and the U.S. Attorney's Office packaged up these old, warmed over election conspiracies from 2020 when, there was no validity then and courts rejected them then. And now, they were approved to not just allow, a subpoena issue, but to allow a raid on an election office is an absolute disgrace. But even worse than that, it is a threat to free and fair elections in 2026. If this is going to be the standard, if this is going to be how judges give the benefit of the doubt to this Department of Justice after everything we've seen, we are in for a rocky 2026, and we all need to steel our spine.
Mark, what stood out to me was the justification, or frankly the basis of which the government used, provided to this magistrate judge. And they used Title III of the Civil Rights Act of 1960. And when I saw that, I was like, well, hold on here. And that particular section, basically, that law was enacted to essentially protect black voters from discrimination or voter suppression. States, particularly in the South, who maybe might not comply, so they wrote this into the Civil Rights Act of 1960. Well, the government, present day, is now using that as the basis, not only for this, but for many of their suits across the country, and many of which that you have beaten them back on, to ask for the voting records and the voter data from all of these different states. They're using the Civil Rights Act to enact their agenda.
Yeah, and we just won a big victory in the state of Michigan on exactly this, where a judge appointed by Donald Trump during his first term rejected the Department of Justice's attempt to access the records in Michigan and rejected it soundly and said that it is that the Department of Justice is wrong. The judge actually credited the arguments made by my law firm on behalf of our clients, so I'm very proud of that work. But the Department of Justice is over right now. Like, they have lost in Georgia, they've lost in Michigan, they've lost in California, they've lost in Oregon. But here's the thing. If other federal judges are going to turn around and let them recycle their lies to seize ballots, it's great we're winning these cases, and we're going to keep doing it, and we're going to keep racking up the victories. But, man, we need federal judges to put on their common sense hat, everyone, and recognize that when they come in with a bunch of election deniers telling the same old lies, that's not probable cause. That's something to watch out for.
That is the point. Exactly, Mark. As I noted coming into this conversation, this is the witch hunt. This is the side. This is what it looks like. This is a real witch hunt, going out and just making up stuff, telling lies, refabricating and repackaging those lies. All that losing that you just referenced still has not, however, stopped the effort to corrupt the system. To push back against those efforts is the next big part. And so instead of chasing our tails, which we seemingly wind up doing in many of these cases, going around with these crazy claims that are made by the Trump Justice Department and Trump officials, what proactively can be done as well? I mean, a lot of this to me seems somewhat defensive. And I've raised this the last few nights about what can we begin to do to preempt some of these actions by this administration? Because we know where this goes. You've talked about it for months now. At this table, we've talked about this is to corrupt, steal, take away the 2026 elections by any means necessary. That is the closest Donald Trump will ever get to Malcolm X, by the way. So using those words, just to be clear.
Justice for a great Nebraskan, Malcolm X.
There you go.
So, look, I wrote something on Democracy Docket recently laying out 3 things every blue state governor and legislature could do and 4 things that Democrats in Congress can push for. And I'd urge them to do those things. I mean, in the states, the Democratic governors need to simplify the certification process so there are fewer places that it can be disrupted. They need to ban the ability of anyone to challenge someone's eligibility to vote, whether that is a third-party vigilante organization run by the RNC or whether that is this Department of Justice. They need to take steps to create real causes of action, both criminal and civil, for people who are denied the right to vote or are intimidated in doing so. The federal government can do a lot of things. Democrats could prohibit the Department of Justice from engaging in these kinds of search and seizure activity. They can prohibit the stationing or the allowing Department of Justice or federal law enforcement within 500 yards of a polling place while elections going on. And so we need Democrats at the state and local level and the federal level to take this seriously. Probably the biggest thing, though, is I'd say that Democrats in Congress should strip immunity from people who are involved in denying the right to vote. They shouldn't have qualified immunity at the state level. They shouldn't have absolute immunity at the federal level. So we need that. And then for the rest of us, look, I'll be out in court. We're in 80 cases in 40 states. So we're going to keep doing our part and having the courts do their job. But a lot of it, Michael, is stuff that everyone can do. They don't all have MSNBC shows or MS Now shows like you do, but everybody's got a platform. Everyone's got a town square, and everybody's got to speak out and say that stealing elections by Donald Trump is not okay, and they're going to stand up for free and fair elections.
Part of what I thought was so interesting about your piece in Democracy Docket is that you're arguing that there is an opportunity in this moment for congressional Democrats because they are having this funding fight. I would argue that there's also an opportunity to create a contrast with Republicans as they seek to push this so-called SAVE Act. There was some new reporting yesterday about the way in which those commands are coming from the White House. This is from NBC News. We, quote, have had productive conversations with House Republicans and are optimistic about the inclusion of the president's wish to ban the use of mail-in ballots with limited exceptions. You've been ringing the alarm bell on their effort to go and mail in ballots. I mean, you and I are old enough to remember they used to love mail-in voting. They used to feel that that was an asset for them. How have we ended up here? And what does it tell you that at the 11th hour, mail-in ballots become part of the sticking point?
I got to tell you, Michael Steele, when he was running the RNC, they got Florida from us based on mail-in ballot and Arizona based on mail-in voting. He ran a very effective mail-in voting campaign in a number of states that became a model that Democrats had to copy. What happened is Donald Trump came in 2020. He knew he was going to lose, and he had to attack the one way that people could vote in the middle of a pandemic so that he could call it fraud when it wasn't fraud. And you're right. I've been sounding this alarm going all the way back to 2020. And have been sounding it ever since. But the fact is that what we all need to do is to call it out for what it is. It is not just voter suppression. It is them trying to make it so hard for you to vote so that they can cheat on the outcome, because they know that notwithstanding their failed effort to gerrymander, notwithstanding their failed efforts to spread election lies, they are still going to be on the losing end of these midterm elections. So the only thing they have left is to try to radically restrict the ability of people to cast ballots and then set themselves up, if they don't like the results, to execute raids and to take over vote counting and to falsely certify election results.
I mean, they got a warrant. They were successful in getting a warrant signed by a magistrate judge in Fulton County for an election that happened in 2020. They did that this year, and they were successful in getting a warrant and then going in and seizing the ballots. I'm going to sound like a broken record, but what is to stop them from doing that the day after the elections this November?
Yeah, Simone, I think you've hit a really important point, and I've had a hard time, frankly, with some of our friends on the left. Donald Trump succeeded here. Like, we need to recognize Donald Trump was able to get a federal judge, get first of all, federal prosecutors, right? He couldn't get them in Georgia, apparently. He got them in Missouri to seek a search warrant. He got FBI agents willing to put their names on this affidavit. They got a federal magistrate judge to sign off on it, and they executed a search in which they wound up with an evidence truck full of ballot boxes and Tulsi Gabbard on her cell phone. And that is a success for the bad guys. And we need to learn from that, and we need to sound the alarm for it for the very reason you said, which is they cracked that lock. And let me tell you, they cracked that lock not just because of what they wanted to do for 2020, but because they learned from that about how to crack that lock in 2026 in November. And if we in the pro-democracy movement, we who care about free and fair elections, don't recognize that and also learn from this experience how we can bolster, how we can safeguard our elections better, then shame on us.
Shame. I mean, it's true. Yeah. Can I just, haven't you war gamed some of this, Michael Steele? Like, it is just shocking to me that more people, I think a lot of people believe like, okay, no, our system, voting, it's all fine. And yes, I think our systems are secure, but the people are what make the systems go. And there are people that have made some very questionable decisions that fly in the face of the foundations of our democracy.
Well, the reality is fundamentally that the system is built in such a way that, as Mark can tell you, there are 50 independent systems that have their own access points, that have a lot of difficulty. But the central reality that Mark keeps pointing up is the ballot security aspect of this, what they can do to undermine the security of that ballot. And there, as Mark, you pointed out, it's on the front end with getting voters scared enough not to go vote, right? So you diminish the turnout. But then on the back end, what you can do to reshape the outcome of that election if you don't like the results.
That's entirely right. They want to make it harder for you to vote and easier for them to cheat. The harder to vote part is really simple. They make it so complicated by passing laws. When that isn't enough, they gerrymander. When that isn't enough, they put ICE agents, look, Steve Bannon said they need ICE agents surrounding polling locations, right? They make it hard enough to vote that you don't. And then if that still isn't enough, because Republicans are so unpopular, because Donald Trump is so unpopular, look, we saw a 31-point swing. Right, like those are epic margins that may still need. They have to go further, and when they get to that place, they will do what they have to do. And in 2020, Donald Trump wanted to seize the ballots. He was not able to because his White House staff and the Department of Justice stood up to him. They're not standing up to him now. And he lamented to the New York Times a few weeks ago that he wished he had seized the ballots in 2020. Well, now they figured out a way to seize those ballots in Georgia. And if they have to do that in the days leading up to or the immediate aftermath in 2026, they'll do it. So that's why we all need to sound the alarm now. We cannot sit back and just assume that the system is the system and it's robust and it's secure. Look, if I'm telling you that I'm worried about this, you should know how worried you should be about this, because I'm usually saying, look, the court's this and we'll be prepared that. This is a real threat. And I promise I'll do everything I can. But if we don't all stand up for it, there's no guarantees.
Mark, real quick before we go, I think there has been a shift in the way we're hearing Democrats talk about the release of the Epstein files, which is they are now talking about what is happening in the present, but they're also taking a longer horizon view to what could happen if they were back in power, had subpoena power. Your sense of what that could look like?
Yeah, look, I mean, the fact that the Trump administration has both mishandled this politically, but also stretched it out this long is one of the big political stories of his administration. I mean, they have not figured out how to handle this because they clearly believe they have something to lie. I mean, I don't know about you, Alicia, but I have never been on my yacht with my various nannies, just happened to sail by an island and sort of stop for lunch with the host.
At that point you knew was a pedophile, at least had some issues.
You bringing your children to see the pedophile with the nanny? I have a lot of questions about that.
But to your point, if Democrats take control, then they can subpoena all of these records. They can subpoena the records not just from the Department of Justice. They can subpoena the bank records from the banks. They can subpoena the yachting records from the marina, right? They can get these records, and they can also put people under oath and make them answer questions. And Donald Trump, for whatever reason, I'll let you guess why, seems terrified that that could happen.
Mark Elias, always so good to have you with us. Thank you for getting us started. Stay with us in just a moment. Congressman Dan Golden is going to join us after blasting ICE for its, quote, outright fascist tactics. And later, breaking developments in the search for Nancy Guthrie. New surveillance video and photos show a masked, armed person appearing to tamper with the camera at her home. We got the latest from Arizona coming up. You're watching The Weeknight.
Trump immigration officials were grilled by Democrats on the House Homeland Security Committee in the first DHS oversight hearing since the shooting deaths of Renee Good and Alex Preddy. Here is Congressman Dan Goldman with Acting ICE Director Todd Lyons.
You said in your opening statement that references to ICE as the Gestapo or the secret police encourages threats against ICE agents.
100%.
The problem is you have it backwards, sir. People are simply making valid observations about your tactics, which are un-American and outright fascist. So I have a simple suggestion. If you don't want to be called a fascist regime or secret police, then stop acting like one.
Congressman Dan Goldman of New York joins us now.
Welcome to the table, Congressman. So I thought there were a number of significant moments in today's hearing, and you were among the highlights of those moments, as we just illustrated, really narrowing down and focusing the truth back to this administration. The country is responding the way it's responding to your ICE agents and your behavior because of your behavior, because of their behavior. And I thought that was fundamentally important to put up in an important way. The other aspect of this that I thought was interesting was when you have that moment when a government official is asked if a U.S. citizen deserves to die. Mm-hmm. And he can't answer that question. Mm-hmm. He refuses to answer that question. What was your take from what you observed from your questioning and from your colleagues' questioning today about the responses of this administration to their fascist behavior?
Well, it unquestionably starts from the top, and that's Donald Trump, and that's Stephen Miller, and that gets to then down to Kristi Noem. But it doesn't stop there. They're all infected with this same lawlessness, this same authoritarian view that somehow, some way, whatever they need to do to meet Stephen Miller's quotas is perfectly fine to do. And that we are going to make American citizens show us their citizenship paper. I mean, what preceded that excerpt is me asking him and him admitting that the other regimes who would force their people to show their citizenship papers were Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union. And that's not what this country is about. And then for them to project and deflect by saying, oh, we have to wear masks because of all these threats. It's like, well, you wouldn't have all these threats to the extent you do, and the data is not at all clear.
It's dubious.
If you would follow the law and the Constitution and stop barging into people's homes without warrants and stop ripping people out of their cars after breaking the window. There's no professional law enforcement agency, criminal law enforcement agency that would ever act this way, ever. And this is civil immigration enforcement, often against people protesting.
Public service should have a face. It's just that simple. There's a reason when you cast your vote, you don't cast your vote anonymously. You cast it with your name next to it so your constituents can either thank you or hold you responsible for that vote. And I think it is rare that you have a moment like this where you both are using your capacity in these committee hearings to bring these folks to the Hill for the purpose of oversight. But you also have this pending funding fight where you can actually use that lever of power to make changes to these institutions. It's telling to me, Leader Jeffries was on earlier with our colleague Katie Tur. It doesn't sound like you guys are close at all on this because Republicans don't actually want to change anything. The list of things they didn't want to change. They don't want to change detention. They don't want to prohibit those ICE agents from wearing masks. They don't want to do independent investigations. I mean, how are you supposed to negotiate with a White House that is basically saying the status quo is working?
Right. And it's all intertwined because the fact that they are wearing masks is very clearly, and that's what I was getting at with Director Lyons today, it's very clearly designed to avoid accountability. And so if they're not known and their face is not out there, they feel unaccountable and invincible. That feeling is then dramatically increased when the president and the Secretary of Homeland Security immediately start calling the victims of murders domestic terrorists. And the FBI says, no, we're not even going to investigate these shootings, and we're going to keep the state out. So you have these lawless, secret police who have been militarized and using excessive force, knowing that they can go around masked without any transparency, and that they're invincible because there's no accountability. So that's why it's so dangerous, and that is the definition of fascism.
I think the masks are extremely important, but Acting Director Lyons, he was very clear today. He was asked would he commit to unmasking the agents, and he answered with one word and said no. So if that's what the director is saying, I'm sure the director was prepped on what to say. The former comms person in me is like, he went through a prep before you go into a contentious hearing. If it seems as though the White House and DHS are also not budging on the masks, is this a sticking point for you all? Yeah. Are you willing to go to the for the masks?
I will say, from my perspective, the masks are the bare minimum.
Yeah.
I believe that I don't know how I would support a bill if Kristi Noem was still the Secretary of Homeland Security. And I think you guys just had a really interesting conversation with Mark Elias. I have an amendment that would prohibit the DHS from seizing voter rolls, from seizing voting machines, which is what Trump tried to do in 2020 with an executive order, because that's what this is all gearing up for. When you have Pam Bondi shaking down Tim Walz and saying, give us your voter rolls and your ballots, and then we'll take ICE out, you know that's what they're targeting. And so these are things that I think are very important.
In addition to
some of the other stuff is just simply follow the law. I mean, the Fourth Amendment prohibits them to do a search of a home without a judicial warrant. It's very simple. And so a number of these other issues are just simply follow the law or enforce the law. We should not have to pass another law to say follow the law.
Yeah, well, you may have to with this Congress. But you had a little bit more fun today as well. In addition to the hearing, you got to sit in a skiff and go through some unredacted files from the Epstein files and had I think an interesting experience there. I would like to get to you on that one. But I wanted to share what Jamie Raskin said he saw when looking at the Epstein files. He noted to Axios on Tuesday that when he searched President Trump's name in the unredacted Epstein files the previous day, meaning on Monday, it came up more than 1 million times.
Wow.
So what did you find?
I didn't find 1 million. I will say that. But what I found is actually a couple of things that I think were noteworthy. First of all, there was one document that I saw the unredacted version of where Donald Trump was making some representations related to Epstein that contradict other representations he has made since then. I don't yet feel comfortable revealing it because they were redacted. There's no reason for it to be redacted, and so I'm asking for them to unredact it. But it was noteworthy that there's a lot in there that really gets right at Donald Trump and what his role is. And I think it's really important that we don't lose the forest of the trees. Mm-hmm. Howard Lutnick lied. He should not have lied. But what he did and his association with Epstein isn't even on the same stratosphere as what Donald Trump's allegations are. So let's not just lose the forest of the trees. The other thing, though, that is really disturbing is that some of the most important documents were still redacted, even for us. And that's after they failed to redact many of the victims and survivors' names, identities, and even videos. And I don't think that's unintentional. And I want to be very clear about that because they have spent, tens of thousands of hours going through this. Back in last March, for the last 2.5 months, they said they have 500 lawyers looking at this. 6 million pages is a lot, but it's not that much. And the fact that you would so clearly include and not redact victims and survivors, to me, is a clear effort to intimidate them not to speak up anymore. And the fact that you're still covering up for other co-conspirators is just doubling down on the cover-up. And so that's really what the takeaway was.
And we're out of time, but just really quickly, you're asking the Department of Justice to unredact something that you saw today. It is currently redacted. There's no legal reason why you couldn't say what it is. And so do you just want to give the department an opportunity? And if they do unredact it, what does that tell us? And then secondly, did you see anything else in the unredacted documents today, like names that were previously redacted for the American people? And will you make those names public?
Yeah, I saw some names that I think may be now public. I haven't checked. Look, I take this very seriously. I was at the Department of Justice for 10 years. I think redactions should not be taken lightly and should be taken very seriously. I am going to give the department a chance to unredact it. What we have seen is when Thomas Massie and Ro Khanna have flagged documents that have no reason to be redacted, you see Todd Blanche, the Deputy Attorney General, scrambling to unredact them and put them back up and say, oh, we're not hiding anything, we're putting everything up. It should not require members of Congress to be going through the 3 million documents and saying, well, why is this redacted? Why is that redacted? And then having the Department of Justice say, okay, well, I'll undo it.
Then is that not the reason then for the members to, You are very proactive and right on, I think a lot of people would say, on many sides of this, on many of these issues. But when it comes to this Department of Justice, do they deserve the presumption of, do they deserve the deference that a normal Department of Justice should get? Why not just pull the rug from under them?
They definitely do not deserve it. But I think that if we go down this rabbit hole where we are tit for tatting every single thing the department does, we're going to run into problems down the road. That being said, they are setting the precedent and they are laying the groundwork. And I will tell you that from my vantage point and my perspective, I am going to be following the precedent that they have been setting come January 2027 when we're in the majority, and we're going to be holding them to it. And so if they don't unredact it tomorrow, I'm happy to talk about it. But I'll give them a chance.
All right. Well, we want you to come back and talk about it, and we want you to keep digging in that minefield of information. Congressman Dan Goldman, we really appreciate you coming by. Straight ahead, folks, new developments in the dire search for Nancy Guthrie. We're going live to Tucson, Arizona, for the latest. This is The Weeknight.